The fluorescent lights of the Millbrook Public Library's community room hummed above 200 silent faces. Margaret Chen stood at the microphone, her worn cardigan hanging loose over her shoulders, and looked directly into the eyes of the man who had just humiliated her. "You want me to explain the problem?" Her voice was steady, deliberate. "The problem isn't that you don't understand poverty, Mr. Hartwell. The problem is that you've convinced yourself your wealth proves you're smarter than everyone else in this room." Daniel Hartwell's smile froze. The tech billionaire had returned to his hometown of Millbrook, Connecticut, for the library's annual fundraiser, expecting gratitude and admiration. Instead, the head librarian he'd just mockingly challenged had just stripped him bare in front of the entire community. The silence stretched. Someone's phone buzzed. A chair creaked, but no one moved. "I asked you a simple question about resource allocation," Daniel finally said, his trademark confidence wavering. "You're the one making this personal. You asked me to explain why the library needs funding when everything's online now." Margaret's fingers tightened around the microphone stand. "You asked me to justify our existence to you, in the building your grandfather helped build, in front of people who come here because they have nowhere else to go." 3 hours earlier, Margaret had been restocking the children's section when Paula, the library board president, had rushed in with the news. Daniel Hartwell was coming. The Daniel Hartwell, Millbrook's hometown billionaire, the boy who'd left for Stanford 25 years ago and turned a dorm room idea into a tech empire worth $40 billion. "He's agreed to speak at the fundraiser tonight," Paula had said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Margaret, this could change everything. One donation from him, and we could renovate the entire building. New computers, updated collections. We might even keep the children's reading program." Margaret had continued shelving books, her practiced hands placing the very hungry caterpillar back in its spot. She remembered Daniel Hartwell, remembered him sitting in the corner by the reference desk, 16 years old, teaching himself to code from library books because his father had refused to buy him a computer. Remembered the way he'd looked at her, then a new librarian, fresh out of graduate school, with a mixture of desperation and determination. "That's wonderful," Margaret had said carefully, now standing under those same fluorescent lights. Watching Daniel's face cycle through confusion, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name, Margaret wondered if she'd just destroyed the library's only chance at survival. The town council had made it clear, without significant private funding, the Millbrook Public Library would close its doors by June. 6 months. After 112 years of serving the community, after surviving the Depression and 2 world wars and the digital revolution, the library would become a historical footnote because the budget couldn't accommodate a $340 million annual operating cost. "Ms. Chen," Daniel said, and his voice had taken on that particular Silicon Valley smoothness that meant he was recalibrating his approach. "I apologize if my question came across as dismissive. I'm genuinely trying to understand the value proposition here. In an age of digital access, of online resources, of AI that can answer any question instantly, what's the actual ROI on a physical library? ROI, return on investment." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. 3 weeks ago, she said, a woman named Jennifer Kowalski brought her 2 daughters here every day after school. Single mother, works 2 jobs, morning shift at the diner, evening shift cleaning offices. The girls, 8 and 10, would do their homework at the tables in the back. I'd help them with their math. On Thursdays, they'd stay for story time. Margaret paused, scanning the crowd until she found Jennifer sitting near the back, her face pale. "Last Tuesday, Jennifer came to my office. She'd been crying. Her daughters had been accepted into a gifted program at the regional school, but she couldn't afford the deposit or the school supplies. She asked if the library had any programs that could help. We don't. Our funding doesn't cover that. But I knew Jennifer's older daughter loved astronomy, so I connected her with Dr. Patterson at the community college, who mentors students. I knew the younger one struggled with reading comprehension, so I spent 6 weeks working with her one-on-one after closing time. That's admirable, Daniel said. But that's social work, not library science. You're making my point. Yesterday, Margaret continued, her voice cutting through his, Jennifer's older daughter got a full scholarship to a STEM summer program at Yale. The younger daughter is now reading at grade level, and Jennifer came back to thank me. She said, "You saved my girls." Not the internet, not AI, not some app. A librarian who knew her children's names, who noticed when they were hungry and quietly left granola bars on their table, who understood that sometimes what people need isn't information. It's someone who gives a damn. The room had gone completely still. Margaret could see tears on several faces. She could also see the mayor shifting uncomfortably. He'd been the one to propose closing the library. Daniel's jaw tightened. One anecdotal success story doesn't justify... Marcus Reeves, Margaret said, 73 years old, comes here every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. His wife died 2 years ago. He doesn't have internet at home, can't afford it on Social Security. He uses our computers to video call his granddaughter in Oregon. He says it's the only thing keeping him alive. Sarah Kim, 17, uses our study rooms to escape her father's alcoholic rages. Got into Cornell, full ride. She told me this library was the only place she ever felt safe. Tom Bradley lost his job at the manufacturing plant when it closed, used our resources to teach himself web design, now runs his own business, employs 6 people. With each name, Margaret watched Daniel's expression shift. The arrogant certainty was cracking, revealing something raw underneath. 87 people came through our doors today, Mr. Hartwell. I know all their names. I know their stories. I know which teenagers are being bullied at school, which elderly residents are lonely, which families are one emergency away from homelessness. You want ROI? How do you calculate the return on investment of a 10-year-old learning that adults can be trusted, of a veteran finding community after years of isolation, of a town having one place left where your worth isn't determined by your bank account? Daniel's face had gone pale. Someone in the audience started clapping, tentatively at first, then others joined until the room thundered with applause. But Margaret wasn't finished. "You asked me to explain the problem," she said quietly, and the room fell silent again. "Here it is. You left Millbrook 25 years ago and built an empire. Good for you, genuinely, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that the person you became was built on the foundation this community gave you. Your grandfather was the library board president for 20 years. Your mother volunteered here every Saturday until she died. And you spent every afternoon from age 14 to 18 in this building because it was the only place that had what you needed to escape." Margaret saw the exact moment her words hit home. Daniel's carefully constructed composure shattered. His hands, which had been gesturing confidently, dropped to his sides. "I didn't forget," he said, and his voice had lost all its polish. "Then why?" Margaret asked. "Did you come here tonight prepared to lecture us about efficiency and digital alternatives instead of remembering what this place actually means?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Paula was making frantic hand gestures, trying to salvage the fundraiser, but Margaret couldn't stop. 23 years of budget cuts, of begging for funding, of watching resources shrink while needs grew. It all came pouring out. "You could write a check right now that would save this library without even noticing the money was gone," she said. "But that's not what made me angry. What made me angry was watching you walk in here like you were doing us a favor. Like we should be grateful for your presence. Like we're just another charity case for your foundation to evaluate based on metrics and impact assessments." "Margaret," Paula whispered urgently, "this library doesn't need your respect, Mr. Hartwell. These people don't need your validation. What we need is for you to remember who you were before you became someone who measures human worth in ROI. Margaret set down the microphone and walked off the small stage. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Behind her, the room erupted into chaos, some people cheering, others arguing, Paula trying desperately to restore order. She pushed through the crowd toward the back exit, not looking at anyone, not stopping when people called her name. She'd just destroyed everything. The library was finished. Her job was finished. But God, it had felt good to finally say it. The November air hit her face, cold and sharp. She leaned against the brick wall of the building, drawing in deep breaths. The parking lot was mostly empty. Everyone was still inside, probably watching Paula try to salvage the disaster Margaret had created. "Miss Chen." She turned. Daniel Hartwell stood in the doorway, backlit by the lobby lights. He'd put on an expensive wool coat, his car keys in his hand. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "I remember you," he said quietly. "You were the librarian who let me stay past closing time, who pretended not to notice when I fell asleep at the desk, who taught me how to use the reference databases when I was too proud to admit I didn't know." Margaret said nothing. "You were the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't worthless," Daniel continued. "My father used to say I was wasting my time with computers, that I should give up and work at his auto shop. You told me I could be anything. Do you remember that?" "I told all the kids that," Margaret said. "No." Daniel shook his head. "You meant it. I could tell the difference." The door opened again, and people began filtering out, conversations washing over them. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I came here tonight planning to write a check," he said. 50,000, maybe 100 if the pitch was good. Enough to look generous without really costing me anything. Margaret felt her stomach sink. "But you're right," Daniel said. "I'd forgotten. I'd turned this place into just another line item, another cause to optimize." He paused, his breath visible in the cold air. "I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to be the person you're asking me to be." "I'm not asking you to be anyone," Margaret said tiredly. "I'm asking you to remember what it felt like to need this place, to need someone to believe in you when no one else did." Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then silenced it. "I have to go. I have meetings tomorrow in San Francisco." "Of course you do." He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Ms. Chen, you were right to call me out. I deserved it." Margaret watched him walk to his car, a black Tesla that probably cost more than the library's entire annual budget. She watched him drive away, taillights disappearing into the Connecticut night. Inside, Paula would be doing damage control. The board would probably ask for Margaret's resignation. The library would close. And Margaret Chen would become the woman who'd saved her integrity while losing everything else. She pulled her cardigan tighter against the cold and went back inside to face the consequences. The Millbrook Gazette's headline the next morning was surprisingly restrained. "Library fundraiser sparks heated exchange." The accompanying photo showed Margaret at the microphone, her face caught in that moment of controlled fury that had silenced 200 people. By noon, it wasn't restrained anymore. Someone had recorded the entire confrontation on their phone. By 2 p.m., it was viral. By evening, Margaret Chen had become Library Lady, the woman who'd destroyed a billionaire with facts. Margaret watched the view count climb from her small kitchen table. 100. Zero views, 500, 1,000, 1,000,000, while her phone buzzed with interview requests from media outlets she'd only seen on TV, The Today Show, Good Morning America. CNN wanted her for a segment on wealth inequality. She deleted them all. "You should do them," said Ruth Alvarez, sitting across from her with a mug of coffee. Ruth had been Margaret's best friend since they'd worked together at the Hartford Public Library 15 years ago. "You've got a platform now. Use it. I embarrassed a potential donor in front of the entire town, Margaret said. I'm probably getting fired. Paula called. 3 times. I haven't answered. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Maggie, you said what needed to be said. But Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a terrible mistake. She kept replaying Daniel's face, that moment when his arrogance had cracked and something vulnerable had shown through. She'd meant to defend the library, but she'd done it by weaponizing his past, by exposing private pain in front of hundreds of people. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her daughter. Mom, are you okay? You're all over Twitter. Someone made a meme of you. It's actually kind of badass. Language, Sophie. Mom, I'm 26. I can say badass. Sophie's voice softened. Seriously, though, are you okay? Margaret looked out her kitchen window at the small backyard, at the bird feeder she filled every morning, at the ordinary life she'd built in this ordinary town. I think I just ended my career, or started a new one. People are calling you a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm a 52-year-old librarian who lost her temper. After Sophie hung up, promising to drive up from New York that weekend, Margaret finally listened to Paula's voicemails. The first 2 were frantic, apologetic, begging Margaret to call her back. The third was different. Margaret, it's Paula. It's 10 p.m. I've been getting calls all day. The board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow. I don't know what to tell them, but I need you to know something. Daniel Hartwell's assistant called. He's flying back to Connecticut tomorrow. He wants to meet with you. Just you. Call me. Margaret sat in the darkening kitchen for a long time, trying to understand what she was feeling. Not triumph. The viral video felt like something that had happened to someone else. Not regret exactly. Something more complicated. She'd spent 23 years being professional, diplomatic, swallowing her frustration while budgets shrank and politicians made promises they never kept. Last night, she'd finally stopped swallowing. The cost was just starting to become clear. The next morning, Margaret drove to the library at 6 a.m. Before anyone else would arrive, she needed to walk through the building alone to remember why any of this mattered. The children's section first, with its worn carpet and faded posters. The biography section where Tom Bradley had taught himself web design. The study rooms where Sarah Kim had escaped her father's violence. The computer lab where Marcus Reeves video-called his granddaughter. Every book had been touched by human hands. Every chair held stories. This wasn't about information access or digital alternatives or return on investment. This was about the stubborn insistence that people mattered, that community mattered, that there should be at least one place in town where your worth wasn't measured in dollars. I thought I'd find you here. Margaret turned. Paula stood in the doorway, still in her coat, holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner. Peace offering? Paula said, handing one to Margaret. They sat at one of the reading tables, the same tables where generations of children had discovered Harry Potter and Where the Wild Things Are, where teenagers had studied for SATs, where elderly residents had found large print mysteries to pass lonely afternoons. The board met last night, Paula said. After you left, it got intense. Margaret waited. Mayor Parsons wanted you fired immediately, said you'd sabotaged the library's only chance at survival. Councilman Rhodes agreed, said you were unprofessional, that you'd embarrassed the town. And then Jennifer Kowalski stood up. She'd been sitting in the back the whole time. She told them exactly what you'd done for her daughters. Then Marcus Reeves stood up, then Sarah Kim, then 20 other people. It went on for 2 hours. People telling stories about you, about this place, about what it means to them. Paula's voice cracked. Margaret, I've been on this board for 8 years. I thought I understood what the library did, but listening to those people, I realized I'd been thinking about it wrong too, like Daniel Hartwell. I'd been focused on circulation numbers and program attendance and operational efficiency. I'd forgotten about Jennifer's daughters, about Marcus, about all of them. Margaret felt her throat tighten. The vote was 7-3, Paula continued. You keep your job, but Margaret, the library is still closing. We still don't have funding. And now we don't have Daniel Hartwell's donation either. We've got until June. I know. He's coming here today. 2 p.m. He specifically asked to meet with you, no one else. His assistant wouldn't say why. They sat in silence, drinking their coffee, as morning light began filtering through the tall windows. Margaret had spent so many mornings like this, in the quiet before the doors opened, in the space between what was and what might be. Whatever he wants, Paula said, you don't owe him anything. You don't owe him an apology. You don't owe him politeness. You told the truth, and the truth was hard, but it was right. Was it? Margaret asked. Or did I just use his past against him because I was angry? Can't it be both? At 1:30, Margaret was back in her office trying to focus on acquisition requests when her email pinged. The message was from an address she didn't recognize. De Hartwell Ventures. Come, Ms. Chen. I'm arriving at 2 p.m. as planned. I'd appreciate it if we could speak privately in your office. There's something I need to understand. I've been watching the video of our exchange. I've watched it 17 times now. Each time I see something different in your face, not just anger, something else. I need to know what I missed. Daniel Hartwell. Margaret read it 3 times, trying to decode what he really wanted. An apology? Revenge? Some way to salvage his public image? At exactly 2 p.m., a Blacktown car pulled into the library parking lot. Daniel Hartwell emerged, dressed more casually than before. Jeans, a sweater, no tie. He looked tired, older than his 43 years. Margaret met him in the lobby. They shook hands formally, and she led him upstairs to her office, a cramped room overlooking Main Street, its walls lined with books and files and photos of library events spanning decades. Daniel stood looking at the photos while Margaret closed the door. Is that me? She followed his gaze. The photo was from 1998, a summer reading program. Teenage Daniel, all elbows and awkwardness, holding up a book for the camera. His smile was tentative, uncertain, nothing like the confident billionaire who'd walked into the fundraiser. You read 87 books that summer, Margaret said, a record that still stands. Daniel turned to face her. I came back to apologize. You said that last night. No, I mean really apologize. Not the corporate kind, where you express regret without admitting fault. I mean the kind where you acknowledge you were wrong and try to understand why. Margaret gestured to the chair across from her desk. They sat. I've spent the last 18 hours thinking about what you said, Daniel continued, about ROI and metrics and forgetting what this place means. And you were right. But I still don't fully understand something. What? Why you were so angry. Not just frustrated or disappointed, angry, personal, like I'd betrayed you specifically. Margaret hadn't expected this. She'd prepared for defensiveness, for negotiation, for a dozen different scenarios, not for this kind of directness. You want the truth? She asked. Please, because you're the success story, Margaret said. You're the kid who made it, who proved that intelligence and determination could overcome anything. Every time funding gets cut, every time some politician questions whether libraries are still relevant, I think about you. I think Daniel Hartwell came from nothing and built an empire, and he did it using library resources. You're my proof that this work matters. She paused, gathering the words. And then you came back and reduced everything to ROI. You looked at me like I was pitching you a startup, like the library was just another investment opportunity to be evaluated and optimized. And I realized you didn't see yourself in these kids. You didn't see Jennifer's daughters or Marcus or any of them. You just saw data points. That's not, Daniel started, then stopped. Actually, that's exactly what I did. I walked in here with my investor mindset, my efficiency calculations, my spreadsheet thinking. I wasn't seeing people. I was seeing problems to be solved or resources to be allocated. Why? Margaret asked. What happened to you? The Daniel I remember wouldn't have thought like that. For a long moment, Daniel didn't answer. He looked out the window at Main Street, at the town that had once been his entire world and was now just another place he'd escaped from. I learned to stop feeling, he finally said. In Silicon Valley, emotion is weakness. Sentiment is inefficiency. You can't scale a company if you're worried about individual stories. You have to think in aggregates, in systems, in metrics. So I trained myself to do that, and somewhere along the way I forgot how to turn it off. He turned back to her. When you called me out last night, it felt like being slapped awake, like I'd been sleepwalking for years, and suddenly someone was yelling my name. And the worst part, I couldn't even defend myself, because everything you said was true. Margaret saw the same vulnerability she'd glimpsed the night before, but now without the crowd watching, without the cameras or the performance. Just a middle-aged man trying to figure out how he'd become someone he didn't recognize. So what now? She asked. I don't know, Daniel admitted. I cancelled my meetings in San Francisco, cleared my calendar for the week. I thought maybe I could spend some time here, see what the library actually does, understand what I missed. You want to volunteer? No, I want to learn. I want you to show me what you showed that 16-year-old kid who didn't know anything except that he didn't want to end up like his father. Margaret studied him carefully. Why should I trust this isn't just a PR move? A way to repair your image after the video went viral. You shouldn't, Daniel said bluntly. You should assume I'm here for selfish reasons, because I probably am, at least partly. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. But I'm also not going to pretend that what you said didn't affect me. It did, and I need to understand why. There was something almost desperate in his voice, something that reminded Margaret why she'd become a librarian in the first place, not to guard books, but to connect people with what they needed to grow. Okay, she said, but I have conditions. Name them. No cameras, no press, no publicity. This isn't about your image or the library's funding. If you're here to learn, not to be seen learning. Agreed. And you do real work. You don't observe from a distance. You help people, you shelve books, you answer questions, you see the actual daily operation. Okay. And Daniel? Margaret leaned forward. If at any point I think you're being performative, that you're here for show, I'll tell you to leave, and I won't be nice about it. For the first time, Daniel smiled. A real smile. Not the polished one she'd seen at the fundraiser. I wouldn't expect anything less. They shook hands again, but this time it felt different. Not like a negotiation or a truce, but like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. As Daniel left, promising to return the next morning at 8, Margaret sat alone in her office and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The library was still closing. The funding problem remained unsolved, and she'd just committed to spending her days working alongside the man she'd publicly humiliated. But maybe, just maybe, something good could still come from the confrontation. Maybe Daniel Hartwell could remember who he'd been, and maybe, in the process, the library could find a way to survive. Or maybe she was being naive. Maybe he'd spend a few days here, write a check to ease his conscience, and go back to San Francisco to optimize his empire. Time would tell. Outside her window, the November afternoon was fading into evening. The library would close in an hour. 87 people had come through the doors today. Tomorrow there would be more, and the day after that, until June, when the doors would close for good. Unless something changed. Margaret turned off her computer and went downstairs to help close up, carrying the weight of hope and doubt in equal measure. Daniel Hartwell showed up the next morning at 7:45, carrying 2 coffees from the local diner and looking genuinely uncertain about what he was doing there. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, offering both cups. "So I got one with cream and sugar, one black." Margaret took the black coffee. "Follow me." She led him through the library's morning routine, unlocking doors, turning on computers, checking the book return, setting up the children's section. Daniel watched silently, occasionally asking questions that revealed both his intelligence and his absolute lack of understanding about how libraries actually functioned. "Why do you arrange the children's books by both reading level and subject?" he asked. "Because a 3rd grader reading at 5th grade level might still want books about dinosaurs, not middle school drama." "Why are these books in plastic bags?" "Those are our literacy kits. Books paired with toys or puppets to help parents engage with reading. The mother who checked out that one works nights. She has 15 minutes in the morning with her son. The kit makes that time count." "Why is there a food pantry in the corner?" Margaret stopped and looked at him. "Because 12% of children in Millbrook live below the poverty line. They come here after school. Some of them are hungry. We can't teach hungry children, so we feed them." Daniel stared at the modest pantry, donated granola bars, fruit cups, crackers. Nothing fancy, nothing that required cooking, just enough to get kids through the afternoon. "Does the town fund this?" "Donations, personal money, some of it mine." "On a librarian's salary?" "Yes." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. Margaret recognized it, the moment when abstract poverty became concrete, when statistics became children with names and faces and empty stomachs. The library opened at 9. Within minutes, the quiet was replaced by activity. Elderly residents claiming their favorite spots, mothers with toddlers heading for story time, teenagers sprawling at tables with headphones and homework. Margaret put Daniel to work immediately. "See Mrs. Patterson over there? She needs help using the computer to apply for Medicare Part D. Show her." "I don't know anything about Medicare." "Then you'll learn together. That's the job." She watched Daniel approach Mrs. Patterson tentatively, introduce himself, sit down beside her. Watched him patiently walk through the government website, asking questions, taking notes. Watched Mrs. Patterson's face soften as this famous billionaire treated her like she mattered. At 10:30, Jennifer Kowalski arrived with her daughters. She froze when she saw Daniel clutching her girl's hands. "It's okay," Margaret said gently. "He's volunteering today." "The girls have a report due Monday," Jennifer said carefully, "about the solar system. I was hoping you could help them find resources." Margaret looked at Daniel. "Can you handle this?" Daniel nodded, though she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He led the girls to the reference section, and Margaret watched as he knelt down to their level, listening as the 8-year-old explained their project. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw the moment the older daughter, the one who'd gotten the STEM scholarship, recognized him. "You're the Hartwell guy," she said loudly. "You invented that app my mom uses." "I helped create it," Daniel said, "but I didn't do it alone. Are you interested in technology?" "I want to be an astronaut." "Then we better make sure this report on the solar system is amazing. Come on, I'll show you how to search the databases." Margaret turned away, helping other patrons, but she kept Daniel in her peripheral vision. She watched him spend 45 minutes with Jennifer's daughters, not just finding resources, but teaching them how to evaluate sources, how to think critically about information, how to build an argument. The same skills the library had taught him 25 years ago. At noon, Ruth showed up with sandwiches. "I heard you have a new volunteer." News travels fast. "It's Millbrook. News about the billionaire working at the library travels at light speed." Ruth studied Daniel across the room. "Is this real or performance?" "I don't know yet." By mid-afternoon, Daniel looked exhausted. He'd helped 6 different people with computer issues, found books for 12 readers, explained the reference system 3 times, and fielded curious questions from everyone who recognized him. "You can take a break," Margaret said. "I'm fine." "You're not. Coffee's in my office." Upstairs, Daniel collapsed into a chair. "How do you do this every day?" "Practice." "No, I mean, how do you care about all of them? Every single person who walks in here with a problem or a question or just needing someone to notice them, how do you not get exhausted?" Margaret sat across from him. "Because they're not problems to be solved. They're people I know. Mrs. Patterson has 3 grandchildren. She shows me photos every week. Jennifer's daughters call me Miss Maggie. I've known some of these families for 20 years. This isn't work to me, it's community." "I used to understand that," Daniel said quietly. "When I was building my company, in the early days, I knew every employee. I knew their families, their dreams. We felt like a team, like we were building something together." He paused. "Now I have 12,000 employees. I couldn't name 100 of them. So what changed? Scale, success. The same things that made the company valuable made it impossible to stay connected. You can't run a billion-dollar company like a family business. You have to systematize, delegate, create hierarchies. The personal touch doesn't scale." "But the library does scale," Margaret said. "We serve thousands of people a year. And yes, I can't know everyone intimately, but I can know the regulars. I can train my staff to see people, not transactions. We can maintain the philosophy even if we can't maintain individual relationships with everyone." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "In my world, that would be considered inefficient. In my world, that's the whole point." That night, after the library closed, Daniel helped Margaret lock up. They stood in the parking lot as the sun set, painting the Connecticut sky in shades of orange and purple. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Sure." "Why did you become a librarian?" No one had asked Margaret that in years. She thought about her answer carefully. "My parents were immigrants from Taiwan," she said. "They worked in restaurants, saved every penny to give me opportunities they never had. When I was 7, my mother took me to the library for the first time. She couldn't speak English well, but she knew the library was important. The librarian, Mrs. Walsh, she didn't just help me find books, she taught my mother how to use the library too. She never made her feel stupid for not speaking English perfectly. She just helped." Margaret's voice softened. "Mrs. Walsh died when I was in college. I went to her funeral. The church was packed. Hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched. Families she'd helped. Children she'd taught. And I thought, that's the kind of life I want to live. Not famous, not rich, but useful. Present. Someone who helps." "And have you," Daniel asked, "lived that kind of life?" "I think so. I hope so." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd started as allies, become strangers, and were now trying to find their way back to some version of connection. "I'm coming back tomorrow," Daniel said, "and the day after. I want to see everything, the programs, the outreach, the budget meetings. All of it. Why? Because you asked me to remember what this place meant, and I'm starting to. But I need to understand what it means now. Not just what it was for me, but what it is for everyone else." Over the next week, Daniel became a fixture at the library. He helped with the after-school program, teaching kids to code. He sat in on budget meetings, his expression darkening as he learned exactly how dire the financial situation was. He attended story time, watching Margaret read Where the Wild Things Are to a group of enthralled toddlers, and Margaret saw something crack open in him. "My mother used to read me that book," he said afterward, "in this room, at these tables." On the 8th day, Daniel asked to see the library's financial records, all of them. Margaret hesitated, then agreed. They spent 3 hours going through budgets, expenditure reports, funding sources, and projections. You're running a $340 operation on a shoestring, Daniel said finally. Wages for you and 2 part-time employees, building maintenance, collections, programming. It's bare bones already. And the town is cutting your funding by 40%. Yes. Why? Budget crisis. The school needs renovations. The road department needs equipment. The mayor says we have to make hard choices. So they're choosing to close the library. Yes. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. I could write a check right now that would fund this library for 10 years. It wouldn't even make a dent in my net worth. Margaret's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay calm. But that's not sustainable, is it? I'm not always going to be here. And if the town isn't committed to supporting the library, what happens when my money runs out, or when I die? Do we just have the same crisis again in 10 years? So what are you suggesting? I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think the problem isn't just funding. It's that the town doesn't understand what the library actually does. They see it as optional, as nice to have but not essential. How do we change that? Margaret had been asking herself that question for 23 years. That afternoon, Daniel sat in on a literacy tutoring session. Margaret worked with a 60-year-old man named James, who'd never learned to read, who'd hidden his illiteracy his entire adult life, who'd finally come to the library in desperation after losing a job because he couldn't read the safety manual. Daniel watched Margaret's patience, her gentleness, the way she never made James feel ashamed. He watched James struggle through simple sentences, his face flushed with effort and embarrassment. And he watched the moment when James successfully read an entire paragraph for the first time, his eyes filling with tears. I did it, James whispered. I actually did it. After James left, Daniel sat in silence for a long time. That's the 3rd time this week I've seen someone cry in this building, he said. Not from sadness, from gratitude, from hope. Yes. How many Jameses are there? How many people in this town are struggling with things that could be helped by the library? More than you'd think, more than I can reach with current staffing and resources. Daniel stood abruptly. I need to make some calls. Can I use your office? Sure. He was on the phone for 2 hours. Margaret tried not to eavesdrop, but his office had thin walls. She heard fragments. No, I need the data by tomorrow. Contact the Chamber of Commerce. Get me a meeting with the mayor and town council. I don't care if it's Thanksgiving next week. This is important. When he emerged, his expression was determined. I'm not just writing a check, he said. I'm going to fix this properly, but I need your help. What kind of help? I need you to help me tell the library's story, not in metrics or ROI, but in the way you told it at the fundraiser. I need people to understand what's at stake. And then I need to build a sustainable funding model that doesn't depend on my charity. Margaret wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this wasn't just another billionaire's vanity project, that he genuinely understood what was at risk, but she'd been disappointed too many times. Why now? She asked. Why do you suddenly care? Daniel met her eyes. Because I spent 8 days watching you do impossible work with inadequate resources and no appreciation. I watched you change lives with basically nothing, and I realized if you could do that with what you have, what could you do with proper support? What could this library become? And because Jennifer's daughter asked me if I'd come to her science fair next month, and I realized I want to. I want to see her project. I want to watch her succeed. I want to be part of this community again. His voice dropped. I've spent 25 years optimizing for profit and efficiency. I'm tired of it. I want to optimize for something that actually matters. Margaret studied him carefully, looking for performance, for calculation, for any sign that this was about image or ego. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked like hope. Okay, she said. Let's fix this. That night, after everyone had gone home, Margaret sat alone in the library and allowed herself to feel something she'd been suppressing for weeks. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe they could actually save this place. But hope had consequences. Hope meant vulnerability. Hope meant the devastation would be worse if it all fell apart. She thought about Daniel's transformation over the past week, about the way he'd connected with Jennifer's daughters, with Mrs. Patterson, with James, about the way his corporate polish had gradually worn away, revealing something more human underneath. She also thought about June, 5 months away. The clock was still ticking. Margaret turned off the lights and locked the door, carrying her hope and her doubt into the November night. Daniel Hartwell's presentation to the Millbrook Town Council took place on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in the same municipal building where Margaret had attended countless budget meetings, pleas for funding, and polite dismissals, but this time was different. Daniel had prepared for 2 weeks, working with Margaret to gather data, stories, and evidence. He'd interviewed 30 library patrons, commissioned an economic impact study, and analyzed comparable communities that had maintained library funding. He'd arrived at 6 a.m. to set up, dressed not in his Silicon Valley casual or his Billionaire formal, but in a simple suit that made him look like someone from Millbrook, not someone who'd left it behind. The council chamber was packed. Word had spread that Daniel Hartwell was making a proposal, and people had come. Library supporters, skeptics, journalists from Hartford and New Haven, and a quiet crowd of regular library users who'd never spoken at a public meeting before. Margaret sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Paula sat beside her, nervous and hopeful. Jennifer Kowalski was there with her daughters, Marcus Reeves, Sarah Kim, home from Cornell for Thanksgiving break, James, the literacy student, looking uncomfortable in his church clothes. Mayor Parsons called the meeting to order. "Mr. Hartwell, you have 30 minutes. Daniel stood. No slides, no charts, no polished tech presentation. Just him and a small stack of papers. 25 years ago, he began, I was a 16-year-old kid who thought he was going to be stuck in this town forever, working in my father's auto shop, drinking myself into the same bitterness and disappointment I saw in his eyes every day." The room was absolutely silent. "The Millbrook Public Library saved my life. That's not hyperbole. Ms. Chen, Margaret, she was a new librarian then, just out of library school. She let me stay past closing time. She taught me how to use databases and reference materials. She helped me apply for scholarships. When I got into Stanford and my father said I was wasting my time, she drove me to the bank to open my first checking account. She made me believe I could be something other than what I was born to be." Daniel's voice was steady, but Margaret could see the effort it took. "I left Millbrook and I built a company worth $40 billion. I employed thousands of people. I created products used by millions. And somewhere in that process, I forgot that I didn't do any of it alone. I forgot about this library, about Margaret, about the foundation that made everything else possible." Yishka, he looked directly at the mayor. 2 weeks ago, Margaret Chen called me out for that. Publicly. In front of 200 people. She told me I'd forgotten what this place meant. She was right. So I decided to remember. Daniel spent the next 15 minutes describing what he'd learned during his time volunteering. He told James's story, Jennifer's daughter's stories, Marcus's story. He presented the economic impact study showing that the library generated $2, $70 in community value for every dollar invested. He outlined the social costs of closure: increased isolation among elderly residents, decreased educational outcomes for children, loss of free internet access for job seekers, but he didn't stop there. "The problem," Daniel said, "is that libraries are being evaluated using the wrong metrics. You're asking, can we afford to keep the library open? That's the wrong question. The right question is, can we afford to close it?" He pulled out his papers. I commissioned a study of comparable towns that closed their libraries. Within 5 years, they saw measurable increases in social isolation, decreases in property values, and reduced educational outcomes. The economic hit was approximately $2 million over 5 years. You're trying to save $340 a year, but the actual cost of closure is nearly 4 times that. Councilman Rhodes leaned forward. Mr. Hartwell, with all respect, we can't just conjure money from nowhere. The budget is what it is. I understand. So here's my proposal. Daniel outlined a 3-part plan. First, he would create a matching endowment. For every dollar the town committed to library funding over the next 5 years, his foundation would contribute $2, building a permanent endowment that could eventually sustain operations independently. Second, he would work with the library and local businesses to create revenue-generating programs, premium services for businesses, partnerships with the school system, grant applications for state and federal funding. Third, and this was the piece that made Margaret's breath catch, he would personally commit to funding a library expansion that would add a makerspace, updated technology lab, and community meeting rooms that could be rented out, creating a new revenue stream. Total initial investment from my foundation, $5 million, Daniel said. But it's structured to incentivize continued town support. If the town cuts funding, the matching ends. This only works if we're partners. The room erupted in murmurs. Mayor Parsons called for order. That's very generous, Mr. Hartwell, the mayor said carefully, but we need to ensure this is sustainable without your continued involvement. What happens if you lose interest? If your foundation changes priorities? Daniel nodded. Fair question. That's why the endowment is designed to become self-sustaining. The goal is that within 10 years, the library can operate primarily from endowment income. With town funding as supplementary, I'm not trying to buy the library, I'm trying to give it the foundation to survive independently. He paused. But here's what I need from you. I need the town to commit, not just financially, but philosophically. I need you to acknowledge that the library isn't optional, that it's infrastructure like roads and schools and utilities. That's the cultural shift that has to happen for any of this to work. Councilwoman Kim, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Why should we trust that you'll follow through? You left Millbrook 25 years ago and never looked back. What's to stop you from leaving again? It was a fair question, and Margaret held her breath, waiting for the answer. You're right, Daniel said. I did leave, and I stayed away, but I'm not asking you to trust me personally. I'm asking you to trust the structure I'm proposing. The endowment is legally binding. The matching funds are contracted. My personal involvement is separate from the financial commitment. He paused. But since you asked, I'm moving back to Millbrook. The room exploded. Margaret's head snapped up. She hadn't known. He hadn't told her. Daniel waited for the noise to subside. I'm keeping my company role, but I'm doing it remotely. I've bought a house on Maple Street. I'll be on the library board. This isn't a publicity stunt. This is me trying to figure out how to be part of a community again, how to be connected to something real. The council asked questions for another 45 minutes. Daniel answered each one patiently, providing documentation, explaining details, addressing concerns. Margaret watched the skepticism on the council members' faces gradually transform into possibility. Finally, Mayor Parsons called for a vote on accepting Daniel's proposal and committing to the town's portion of funding. The vote was 6-2 in favor. The room erupted in applause. Jennifer's daughters were crying. Marcus Reeves was shaking Daniel's hand. Sarah Kim was recording everything on her phone, already posting updates. Margaret sat very still, trying to process what had just happened. The library was saved, not just temporarily, but sustainably. After 23 years of fighting, of watching resources shrink and programs cut, of begging politicians to see value in what they considered optional. It was over. She felt Paula's hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Maggie." "No," Margaret said softly. "We did it." After the meeting, after the reporters and the well-wishers and the celebrations, Margaret found Daniel standing alone in the council chamber, looking at the photos on the wall, a century of Millbrook history captured in black and white. "You didn't tell me you were moving back," she said. "I didn't know how to," Daniel admitted. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me." "I'm not sure I do believe you. Moving back to Connecticut, giving up San Francisco." "I'm not giving it up entirely, but yes, relocating my primary residence. I've spent 25 years chasing the next big thing, the next exit, the next valuation milestone, and I'm exhausted, Margaret. I'm tired of optimizing. I want to be somewhere that I'm not the smartest person in the room, where my worth isn't measured by my net worth, where I can actually connect with people." He turned to face her. "I want to watch Jennifer's daughters grow up. I want to help James learn to read. I want to be part of something that matters in a way that's immediate and tangible, not abstract and scalable." Margaret searched his face for traces of the arrogant billionaire who'd challenged her 2 weeks ago. She found none, just a tired, earnest man trying to find his way home. "This is going to be hard," she said, "living in Millbrook again. You're not going to be anonymous. Everyone's going to have opinions about you, expectations. And the library work, it's not glamorous. It's repetitive and often thankless." "I know. And me, I'm not going to treat you differently because you're a donor. If you screw up, I'm going to tell you. If you start slipping back into billionaire mode, I'm going to call you out." I wouldn't want it any other way. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who'd started as teacher and student, become adversaries, and were now tentatively becoming partners. "Thank you," Margaret said finally, "for listening, for changing, for remembering." "Thank you for not giving up on me," Daniel replied, "for seeing past what I'd become and remembering who I used to be." The library's future was secured, but Margaret knew the real work was just beginning. The endowment had to be managed, the expansion had to be planned, the community had to be maintained, and Daniel Hartwell had to figure out how to be a person again, not just a portfolio. 3 months later, on a February afternoon cold enough to hurt, Margaret stood in the library's new community room, watching Daniel teach a coding class to 12 teenagers. He'd found his rhythm, coming to the library 3 days a week, running programs, helping patrons, sitting on the board. He'd also made mistakes. He'd tried to reorganize the cataloging system to be more efficient before Margaret reminded him that librarians had been doing this for centuries and didn't need tech optimization. He'd gotten frustrated with bureaucratic processes until Paula gently explained that democracy was supposed to be slow. He'd had to learn to be patient, to accept that change happened at community speed, not startup speed. But he was learning, adapting, becoming. Jennifer's older daughter had just been accepted to a summer program at MIT. The younger one was reading 2 grades above level. James could now read the newspaper, and he came to the library every Saturday to practice with Margaret. Marcus Reeves had started a video chat group for isolated seniors. Sarah Kim had come home for winter break and given a talk about college applications, inspiring a dozen other students. The library had become what it was always meant to be, a center of community, growth, and possibility. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Mum, I saw the article in the Times about the library. I'm so proud of you." The article had run that morning, part of a series on community revival. The headline read, "How One Librarian's Confrontation Saved More Than a Library." It told the story of the fundraiser, the viral video, Daniel's transformation, and the library's revival. But what the article couldn't capture was the quieter truth, that change was never simple or clean. that Margaret still had moments of doubt about whether Daniel's commitment would last, that Daniel still struggled with his billionaire instincts, that the library's funding, while more secure, still required constant vigilance and advocacy. Real transformation wasn't a moment. It was a process, messy and ongoing and never quite complete. That evening, after the library closed, Margaret found Daniel sitting in the reference section, in the same spot where he'd sat as a teenager. "What are you reading?" she asked. He held up the book. "Your master's thesis. I found it in the archives. The library as community anchor, reimagining public space in the digital age." God, I forgot that was in there. I was so idealistic then. You were right, though. Everything you argued about libraries being more than information sources, about the importance of physical community spaces, about the social infrastructure role, it's all true. Margaret sat down across from him. "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What?" "That fundraiser speech, the one that went viral. I was so angry that night. I said things that were true, but I said them to hurt you. I weaponized your past, and I'm not sure I ever apologized for that." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You don't need to apologize. You said what needed to be said. If you'd been polite, if you'd been professional, I would have written a check and left and nothing would have changed. You didn't just save the library, you saved me." "I don't know if I'd go that far." "I do. I was drowning in my own success, Margaret. I'd built this empire and lost myself in the process. I'd forgotten how to be human. You reminded me, violently, publicly, but effectively." He smiled. "Besides, if you'd been nice to me, we wouldn't have this relationship. I think you needed to be angry, and I needed to deserve it." Margaret thought about that. About how conflict, uncomfortable and painful as it was, could sometimes be the only path to truth, how politeness could enable stagnation, how love, real love, whether for a person or a community, sometimes required the courage to be difficult. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we keep working. The endowment's solid, but we need to grow programming. I've been talking to the school board about partnerships. And I have this idea about a mobile library unit to reach rural areas outside town." "Daniel." "Yes? Take a breath. Slow down. You don't have to fix everything at once." He laughed. "Old habits." They sat together as the winter darkness gathered outside, in the library that had brought them both back to what mattered. The building was over a century old, its wooden floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps, its shelves holding stories that had consoled and challenged and changed countless lives. And it would continue, not because of one person's wealth or one librarian's dedication, but because a community had decided it was worth saving, because people had stood up and told their stories, because sometimes, when pushed far enough, ordinary people found extraordinary courage. Margaret Chen had spent 23 years being professional, diplomatic, swallowing her frustration. The night she'd stopped swallowing, the night she'd let her anger speak truth, had changed everything. Not because anger was always right, but because sometimes it was necessary. Not because confrontation was always productive, but because sometimes it was the only thing that worked. She looked at Daniel Hartwell, the boy she'd helped 25 years ago, the billionaire who'd forgotten himself, the man who was learning to be human again. Their journey wasn't finished. There would be more conflicts, more mistakes, more difficult conversations, but they would have them together, in this building, in this community, in the ongoing work of creating something that mattered. Outside, the February wind rattled the old windows. Inside, two people sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by books and possibility. The library's lights glowed warm against the winter darkness, a beacon of what communities could be when people remembered to see each other, to value each other, to fight for each other. And tomorrow, the doors would open again. 87 people would come through, maybe more, each one carrying their own story, their own struggle, their own hope, each one deserving to be seen. That was the work. That was the point. That was what Margaret Chen had spent her life defending. And now, finally, it would continue.